Check, check.
Welcome to Zoom. Please press pound, then enter your meeting ID, followed by the pound sign again.
And you start late even.
Yeah, like.
It's me.
Testing. 1, 2. Okay. Yep. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel. I'm Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Tuesday, March 19th. It is 9:02 a.m., and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. With me here today is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Nicole Morgan. Joining us as well is our Executive Director, Eric Oppenheimer, our Chief Deputy, Jonathan Bishop, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer. Our Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her today is Margie Ardrel and Biba Malitic. As you can see, this is a hybrid meeting. It is being webcast and recorded and has an in-person component. For those of you joining us virtually, you should be either viewing us through our traditional webcast at YouTube Live or the Cali PA website. But if you are having or intend to comment on any of today's items, please do look at the top of today's agenda. There's a link and instructions on how to get onto the Zoom platform. If you are having any challenges doing so, please do email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help get you onto the platform. Once you are, your camera will be off. You'll be on mute until it's your turn to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone in the room here, good morning. Good to see you all. We're in the Cali PA building here in Sacramento. A few announcements for us as well. Please do observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further direction. Also, if you intend on commenting on any item today, there is a QR code on the side of the room. There is also a tablet in order to sign up. Once you are at the mic, please do introduce yourself and any organization you're a part of. And lastly, please do silence any phone noise-making devices just so that we can have an uninterrupted discussion this morning. As we traditionally start, we'll begin this morning with public forum. And I know we have a number of public forum commenters. I think the first here is someone who is in person and would like to call up Mary Wood.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
Yeah.
Always good to go first.
My name is Mary Wood. Because of time constraints, I will only discuss my problems of receiving affordable water from a small private water association. That is a key word. Water consumers who belong to the CPUC have safeguards in place. I am saying, and I've been living, no safeguards for the private association that I have against unfair water rates, unsafe water practices, and complaint processes. Personally, although treated professionally by local and state government, there is not enough oversight, transparency, and enforcement. I have heard we don't get involved in personality conflicts, that we work it out between yourselves. We don't go to litigation and talk to your association. Well, when you're in the middle of a huge legal dispute, there is no talking to these people, and there is no support from government agencies. The association accepts no wrongdoing, and they basically say, you sign the contract, you need to live with it. If your water provider is private, there needs to be statutory guidelines to ensure affordable, non-discriminatory, and sustainable water rights for all consumers. The private utility I belong to is located in El Dorado County. It is a simple gravity-fed, unmetered system. There are only 7 cabins. This is only water only. And my property, which is a restaurant and commercial, cabin. The water rate is 50/50. So I pay 50% of all revenue coming in yearly. They are charged, the cabin owners, $250 a year. I am a combined total charge $1,750. The same 50/50 rate also applies to special assessments. So I pay, if it was the same thing, $250. They pay $250. I pay $1,750. There is mostly it's just when they need money. They do special assessments. There's really no budget. There's no criteria. One of the persons says, "We need more money. We need $10,000 on our bank account." So basically, in my pursuit of safe and affordable water, I have paid various attorneys more than $60,000. I've had a lien on my property since 2017 and a half, when I stopped paying dues to force their hand to go to mediation. And no water to my restaurant since November 4th, 2020, after mediation, and they didn't want to go to arbitration. In addition, I reportedly owe the association $12,500 in dues, $10,750 in special assessments, which have been yearly since 2018, and $5,743 in interest, with a grand total of $28,324. Shockingly, during the same time period, the individual class customers paid only $3,327 for dues and assessments, all 7 years combined. Who will help me fight for my right for fair and equitable rate structure? It is my opinion, if there's no oversight, transparency, or enforcement during the creation of utility contracts and going forward, I will never have the right to safe and affordable water. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for the time this morning, Ms. Wood. I really do appreciate you coming before the board and hear your frustration, certainly. As you noted, because it's a private water utility, the Public Utilities Commission is the most direct regulator of the system and some of these challenges. And I know they have more oversight over rates and have a public defender's office, I believe. So, I can look to our folks here. Please do. We can try to follow up as best we can if you're not necessarily getting responses from the PUC, but it is a little more in that lane. But I do appreciate you bringing your concerns and here speaking before the board about this. Next, I'd like to call up Conrad Fisher, who will be followed by Nick Jocelyn.
Hi, thank you. I'll try to be brief since I've spoken about the Shasta plenty of times, but gratitude to the board and staff for making the Shasta a priority and stream flow requirements a priority in general. But despite these statements, the board hasn't yet set a timeline for what will happen next. So I guess I would just respectfully ask that the board hold a hearing this year, preferably on the sooner side, to formally make a decision on how it will manage flows in the Shasta River. In the letter denying our petition, the board outlined different options. Let's explore them, and let's explore them based on an honest look at history and how they might actually apply here. Policy for water quality control, if that goes down the same path as the Bay Delta, we will be looking at decades of squabbling about what the science says, and at the end of the day, choosing a path of voluntary agreements or decreasing what the best available science said is necessary. We've seen in the Shasta and statewide collaborative or voluntary agreements are not working. So let's have an honest discussion, but regardless, make a decision soon. And whichever path the board chooses, I would also ask that we put in place some interim measures so that while the humans determine the best long-term solution, the fish at least get something that will prevent any additional extinction events of cohorts of coho or anything else. So let's look at both interim solutions and make a decision this year on what the long-term solution will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Really appreciate your time this morning in addressing the board and continued advocacy on this issue. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Nick Jocelyn, will be followed by Amber Jameson and then David Webb.
Hi, thank you. My name is Nick Jocelyn. I'm a fifth-generation resident of Siskiyou County. My family ranched in the Shasta Valley for about 160 years. When we folded, several forces were at play. Sometimes families just lose steam, and mine certainly did. But new regulations also made us stumble and fold. So I know exactly what it feels like to see new regulations on the horizon and fear for the future of multi-generational traditions. I never come to these board meetings because I have something against ranching. In fact, we still lease our mountain property, the neighboring ranch, to graze cattle. I've actually tried to communicate to other ranchers that we're in a time where tradition needs to transition to innovation. We live in a world with less water, and we simply cannot do things the way we used to do them. Even ranches with riparian rights will face never before seen challenges in a drier climate in the Shasta Valley, where the glaciers on the north side of the mountain are in dramatic retreat. The glaciers are the river and groundwater savings account, and that account is being tapped year after year while the glaciers shrink. We can't pretend that the current level of irrigation can go on without ranchers facing real hardship. And yet ranching is the last beneficial user to feel this hardship. Tribes have lost so much, it's almost incomprehensible. Commercial fishing and coastal communities have been devastated. Several species of fish are gone, and those that are still present are hanging on by a thread. We've seen astronomical amounts of money spent. By my rough tally, $100 million has been spent in the Shasta, and fish numbers hover near extirpation levels, and flows have regularly seen single digits. The emergency regs have prevented a total collapse, but we aren't anywhere near where we need to get to recover our ecosystem and the other beneficial uses that have been eliminated. New voluntary solutions don't have any natural backstop against failures because the ecosystem is simply so weak. We need a regulatory backstop that we can then build upon with innovative solutions. We can no longer pretend that spending money is helping. What's truthful and honest about the current situation in the Shasta is that ranchers are going to fail in the coming years, whether this board moves for permanent in-stream flow regulations or not. I would urge that the board really digest this somber reality, but also acknowledge the losses that have already occurred for tribes, coastal communities, and the fish. Society should no longer be willing to burden multiple segments of our population so that one group remains whole. There has to be equity. We need the board to act definitively on a timeline for permanent in-stream flow protections for the Shasta before it's too late for fish and the people who rely on them to recover from the current conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jocelyn. I appreciate your time this morning addressing the board. Next, I'd like to call up Amber Jameson, be followed by David Webb, and then Kimberly Burr.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity. My name is Amber Jameson, Water Advocacy Director with the Environmental Protection Information Center. Today, I'd like to use this public forum to respond to your denial of our petition to set long-term flow protections for the Shasta River. First off, I'd like to thank the board for the work it's been doing in the Shasta watershed, including background work on developing a foundation to eventually do long-term flow management and the implementation of emergency regulations. However, background work and emergency regulations are not long-term protections. For nearly 20 years, I've worked in the policy world for private planning firms, public agencies, and now in the nonprofit realm. And I've seen decision-making bodies and document writers strip all meaningful teeth or actions from a regulatory document by simply changing all shalls to shoulds and vice versa. What I see is that the board is undertaking preparatory work towards potentially setting long-term in-stream flows in the Shasta. And the salmon strategy directs the board to commence work to establish minimum in-stream flows, but nothing that commits to actually establish minimum in-stream flows by any set dates. The Water Board's petition denial letter does not contain a single commitment to develop concrete deliverables that will result in meaningful flows for the Shasta. At this rate, we could do 10 more years of voluntary agreements, flow studies, water hydrology models, and the board will have met all of its commitments as laid out in its denial letter, as well as the salmon strategy, without having any permanent flows in place. The board seems committed to undergoing a collaborative process with voluntary cooperative solutions in the watershed, which sounds good in theory, but evidence shows that irrigators in these watersheds have violated curtailment orders. They've overinflated their baseline water use so that they don't have to reduce water consumption. They're currently planning a media disinformation campaign to smear the dam removal efforts and protest any regulations that impact water use. And in fact, today they're going to the Board of Supervisors for Siskiyou County and asking for an emergency declaration so that they can get more money for the dams coming out, even though it was anticipated for nearly a decade. Last I checked, not a single irrigator has registered for the local cooperative solution program because none of them want to commit to installing water meters. What does this tell you? They don't want to cooperate. And in the meantime, the board is deciding what it can do without any concrete commitments, and the salmon populations are dwindling. I imagine that the board is familiar with the Mill, Deer, and Antelope Creeks, where for years the water board has attempted LCSs and voluntary agreements to no avail. And finally, in February this year, CDFW wrote a letter to the water board essentially stating that CDFW has been unable to achieve any results with voluntary agreements with water users. And therefore, as the state's trustee agency for fish and wildlife, CDSW has asked CDFW has asked the Water Board to use the flow recommendations to inform a long-term flow setting project, which is exactly what's needed in the Shasta River. I still can't figure out why coho populations are not being monitored in the Shasta, given that they're listed under the Endangered Species Act. But with public funding from CDFW and the Wildlife Conservation Board going to lining ditches instead of managing endangered species, it's becoming very clear that these are political decisions and not based in science or policy. We've asked the OAL if the Water Board is correctly understanding the Office of Administrative Law's finding as described in the petition denial letter, inferring that the OAL memo indicates that a final result must occur within 30 days or the petition must be denied. And according to Stephen Escobar, senior attorney for the OAL, he said, quote, "In no way should our response to that petition be interpreted as preventing an agency from adopting regulations requested pursuant to Government Code Section 11340.6. In closing, I request that the board hold a hearing this year to formally make a decision on how it's going to manage flows in the Shasta, including timelines, milestones, and deliverables. Thank you for this opportunity to address the board and for considering this action to address these items in a time-sensitive matter. They're integral to the survival of one of the last wild runs of ESA-listed coho salmon in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and comments this morning, Ms. Jameson. Next, I'd like to go to David Webb, be followed by Kimberly Burr, then Drew Hunt, and Debbie Peterson.
Thank you, board members. I'd like to also speak briefly to the recent staff decision to deny the flow setting petition, which we recently filed with you. While we have all heard and truly appreciate both the board's statements and, more importantly, its actions of commitment to providing in-stream flows for the Shasta, but despite that, we felt then and we still feel now that taking more formal board action on our petition is an important step that needs to be taken. In their denial letter, the board staff noted that they were working on the emergency curtailment. Yet we know that is year to year, and that seldom does the governor make a drought proclamation. It's wholly unreliable for something that is needed permanently. They also alluded to various alternative processes, none of which were well defined, nor are any of them backed up at present by either timelines or mandated in-stream flow backstopping. We cannot expect those alternative procedures to work without having a commitment behind them that says one way or the other we will meet some minimum. And finally, they pulled the seeming wild trump card, a finding by the OAL on an unrelated petition by the Water Board that the Water Board staff, basically an unrelated petition not from the Water Board, that Water Board staff interpreted as essentially saying the public has no right to petition its government for a redress of grievances that take more than 30 days to resolve. And since that was impossible, staff had to deny our petition. Our state constitution guarantees us that right of petition. In my subsequent communication with the Office of Administrative Law in the last few weeks, they deny that their decision precluded consideration of complex matters requiring more than 30 days to resolve. What Stephen Escobar wrote, as you just heard from Amber, was that in no way should our response to that petition being the one from the State Gaming Commission, be interpreted as preventing an agency from adopting regulations requested pursuant to a Government Code Section 11340.6 petition. OAL is apparently not as comfortable with denying us our constitutional rights as is being claimed. In the denial letter, board staff accurately noted that the Water Board began working in earnest on flow setting in the Shasta in 2014. 10 years with nothing even viewable by the public is hardly reassuring. And what that letter failed to note is that in-stream flows have been a contentious problem in the Shasta since 1916, with the ill-advised creation of the Greater Irrigation District, and an officially state-documented in-stream flow problem since 1918. Just how long are we supposed to be happy now to wait for these in-earnest efforts without a formal commitment and timeline? There are other considerations that should not be ignored. The SGMA process, one also unfortunately in your laps, requires groundwater to be managed in part to not impact surface flows. For most of the state, that groundwater surface interaction is so far in the distant past as to be no longer relevant. Not so in Siskiyou County, where groundwater discharge is the foundation of not only in-stream flows, but also for meeting surface water diverters' water needs. Without an indication of the magnitude of surface flows, SGMA planning for groundwater management can and is only targeting the dried up river conditions of pre-2019. The SGMA train is leaving the station and in-stream flows are not on board. Groundwater management to protect surface flows needs to be integrated into planning as soon as possible, even if only to meet interim guidelines that need to be established by means similar to what has been done with cannabis diversions. And finally, there's the matter of your reputation. As you no doubt know, Siskiyou County collectively seems to have a problem with authority. As a state board, you relied on a drought declaration to set in-stream flow in 2021 that was higher than what had been seen in anyone's living memory, wet year or dry. We really applaud that. But vocally, irrigators in the Great Irrigation District, where I met with them shortly thereafter, they found it to be completely irrational to request an in-stream flow that was higher than what was routinely seen in any wet year or dry year prior to that. Following that with the adoption of the in-stream flow petition for the Scott, but denying a similar petition for the Shasta, has been only viewed locally as seemingly arbitrary. And perhaps advantageous, but arbitrary nevertheless. And then to cap things off by extending provisions of a drought emergency into a seemingly normal water year looks to be, to those more interested in diverting water for irrigation, is absolutely capricious. We need to take a firm and consistent stance, demonstrating that in-stream flows are an essential component of the public trust and will be protected. Agendizing our petition and making some sort of formal board action is needed. The board should hold a hearing soon this year to formally make a decision on how it is going to manage flows in the Shasta, including timelines and milestones. Thank you for your attention to this. We truly appreciate your work so far, but we need to maintain the progress and commitment that's been made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Appreciate your comments here in public forum. There's a lot I'd like to start to exchange on, but it is public forum. And just what I'll note, and I know there's a couple commenters further on this item, the board at the adoption of the emergency curtailment here said, we are going to have a conversation here on where we're going to be going. So, there is direction here from this dais to have a discussion, even if it's not here noticed and have a date for it yet. But appreciate everyone's comments here. Next, I'd like to go to Kimberly Burr, be followed by Drev Hunt, and then Debbie Peterson. Oh, apologies, Ms. Burr, you are on mute. You should be invited to unmute. There you are.
Good morning,
Good morning.
and good morning, Mr. Escobar. Thank you for letting me make a few simple comments here this morning. I really appreciate you guys continuing to offer the Zoom option. I thank you, and I think the climate thanks you, and I hope that continues. It's very helpful. I'm kind of just wanted to respond to the letter that Fish and Wildlife wrote in February. I think Amber referenced this important letter. I think it gives the board, your board, a strong foundation to move forward on some of these in-stream flow problems, because it's now you've got a wildlife agency that is clearly calling out the need for maintaining in-stream flows and adequate flows, not just emergency flows. And we've done emergency flows, we've done voluntary agreements for at least 10 years in some of these watersheds. And I think the duty now is on the water board to, fairly protect beneficial uses. So I don't think that this is rocket science. The growers and the ranchers and diverters, let's just call them, have had many years to figure this out, to provide their own storage. This cannot be put on the backs of the watersheds anymore and the endangered species. Just a quote from the letter, I don't know if you guys even had a chance to read it, but it says that purpose of this letter is to submit an in-stream flow recommendation to the State Water Board to inform a long-term flow setting process. This is specifically for Mill, Deer, and Antelope Creeks to support anadromous salmonid year-round ecological stream functions. They just say it's an imperative that the State Water Board consider the information included in the letter to inform this process. So I don't think Deer, Antelope, and Mill Creeks are unique. We have the Shasta, we have Green Valley Creek in Sonoma County on the Russian River. These issues are old, and the fish are basically on their last legs. So we're really counting on you guys to work with the other agencies to leverage these types of findings and move forward this year, and not rely on emergency regulations or voluntary agreements, but to say that this is what the in-stream flows should be, and all water diverters need to do their part. So I appreciate you guys taking that to heart, and let's move forward now and not kind of be too sympathetic to people who've had decades to conform and to help us all help the fish. Thank you, and I hope you have a great meeting, and appreciate your time.
Appreciate yours as well. And thank you for your comments here in public forum, Ms. Burr. Thank you. Next, I'd like to go to Drev Hunt, be followed by Debbie Peterson, and I believe our last commenter this morning will be Osha Meserve.
Thank you, Chair Escobar and members of the board. My name is Drev Hunt. I am the legal director with California Coastkeeper Alliance, and usually you'd be seeing Cody Phillips, as you all know, but he's at the legislature today doing important work over there, including supporting budget change petitions and other actions that the State Water Board has been requesting in order to do some of this important work that other folks today have been talking about on the Shasta River and on the Scott. And, I'd like to start out, I don't need to repeat everything that's been said and said well by folks who were part of our coalition that submitted the petition, which was denied. But I want to make sure to recognize the work that the board has done to date in the watershed in the Shasta, including pulling it along into the process for emergency regulations on the Scott, including directing staff, as you mentioned, Chair Escobar, to start working on something more long-term. I don't think there was firm commitment on exactly what that means, and I think that's what folks here are asking for today. And I also appreciate that the Shasta and Scott are a priority in the Racial Equity Action Plan, the strategic plan of the board, the budget request I already mentioned, and that it's in the governor's salmon strategy, which I know isn't your strategy necessarily, but it's part of what you've been tasked with implementing. But all these actions are, so far that we've seen have been directed at dealing with the emergency and looking forward, but they're not setting long-term protections. And most importantly, I think they're to date, we haven't heard what the standard is that we're trying to achieve with the long-term actions. And so when you do act later this year, which sounds like you have an intention to do, we need to talk about what that goal is. And fundamentally, that goal needs to be recovery of the salmons that use the watershed. The Endangered Species Act calls for that. The state's public trust duties and obligations call for that. And we hope that that important setting of the objective will be a critical part of the conversation as we continue to move forward. So while we recognize that the state board denied the petition that we submitted, we're here again asking for what we think is well within state board's authority when faced with a petition like was received, to set a meeting, to put it on the calendar. We filed the petition in part to make sure the conversation stayed open, that it kept moving forward. We see that happening, and we hope that we will see an actual hearing date set. It's going to take staff time to prepare for that. It's going to take the public time to prepare for that. as you recall, during the emergency regulation petition process or the emergency regulations previously, it was fast. It was pretty furious, and there was a lot of sort of decision making that was done without fully being able to appreciate everything that was going on. So I would just urge you all to set a hearing, September, October, but put it on the calendar so that we all know it's coming and we can all be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Mr. Hunt. Appreciate your time and advocacy here, and give my best to Mr. Phillips. Next, I'd like to call up Debbie Peterson. Will be followed by OSHA Meserve.
Good morning, council and board, board. I'm Debbie Peterson. I'm a former council member and mayor and also planning commissioner for over 13 years in the small city of Grover Beach. And I'm here supporting the message of Vic and Deb Early, who you may have heard from previously. We have recently launched an initiative that is currently supported by 4,000 of our 13,000 residents and 8,000 registered voters, only 4,800 of whom speak. And I give you these numbers because I want you to understand that the community overwhelmingly supports a citizens ballot initiative to repeal rates which were put into effect for the Central Coast Blue Project, and we simply cannot afford it. And so we're asking that you pause any grant that you have coming out to Central Coast Blue and allow us time to find some projects that may be more affordable and may also deal not just with the drought aspect, but with how we collect the water that's coming in now and reserves enough money for us to do that without bankrupting us. So thank you for your time and thank you so much for your service. We're so appreciative. And I don't know if I said, but I am representing Grover H2O, which is the committee that has launched the initiative with the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Appreciate your time this morning. And I believe our last commenter here will be OSHA Meserve.
Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
We can. Good morning.
Hello, I'm OSHA Meserve, and I represent various entities in the Sacramento and Bay Delta region, including local governments, water districts, reclamation districts, and community groups. And I wanted to comment very briefly on a procedural issue that I wanted to bring to the board's attention. And that is that there's multiple water rights proceedings right now going on at one time with overlapping deadlines at the water. And in particular, there's protests due on the Delta Tunnel petition for change on April 29th. And then on that same day, for the site's water rights hearing, the list of case in chief witnesses are due on that same day with the actual case in chief exhibits due shortly thereafter. And both these proceedings are of great importance to folks who are working on Delta issues and flows and the health of the Delta. So I just want to point out to the board and staff that many of the same entities, including nonprofit groups, small professional offices, whether they be consultants or attorneys, are working on both of these matters. And it's very difficult to have deadlines fall on the same day like that. And it inhibits public participation fully in these very important proceedings. So I would respectfully ask the board and staff to carefully review its deadlines for hearings to ensure that the interested public is not unfairly precluded from participation by being jammed with deadlines. And I understand the water board itself may have different hearing teams for these matters, but stakeholders do not likely. So I think there should be a reasonable accommodation without overlapping deadlines for these two proceedings in particular, and in general to make sure that this doesn't happen, especially in the same watershed, which the Delta obviously is huge, but these are both Bay Delta issues. So I would suggest that the board and its staff consider, for instance, extending the tunnel protest deadline so that it doesn't overlap so much with the site's deadlines to allow full public participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meserve. I know our Administrative Hearings Office is running all of those, so the opportunity to better coordinate is always there. Looking to Mr. Loffer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ms. Meserve, I hope you've actually made that comment to the AHO, which is presiding over both of those proceedings. In addition, we will, just in case there are any questions as to whether or not this crossed a line with respect to ex parte communications, we'll make sure that the communication is documented in the record for both, as well as going out onto the service list for both those proceedings. I know the AHO is doing a delicate job in terms of how it's handling the processing of the various change petitions and new water rights permits that are before. I know it's sensitive to some of those concerns, and we'll make sure that it gets relayed out from your public comments today.
Thank you, Mr. Lawfer, and thank you, Ms. Meserve. I appreciate the flag this morning. Okay, that wraps up public forum, and appreciate everyone's time addressing the board this morning. Let's move on into official board business. Our first item here is consideration of the board's meeting minutes from the March 5th board meeting. Are there any adjustments to the meeting minutes? If not, be open for a motion.
Move adoption of the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
Board Member Morgan?
Aye.
Board Member McGuire?
Aye.
Board Member Firestone?
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The meeting minutes are adopted, and brings us to item number 2, which is an informational item on the current hydrologic conditions and response. Good morning, Ms. Warner. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Abby Warner, and I'm with the Drought Planning, Hearings, and Special Projects section in the Division of Water Rights. This morning, I'm going to be giving a brief update on the current hydrologic conditions and response. Next slide, please. So the next few slides will show cumulative precipitation in inches for this water year to date, shown by the blue line in the middle of the graph, that's marked current, compared to the colored lines representing other previous water years, and the average, which is the shaded light blue area. This graph specifically pertains to the Northern Sierra. As of March 18th, the Northern Sierra has had 38.7 inches of precipitation during this water year. This is 94% of average for the state. This is down 4% from the previous board meeting. Next slide, please. For the San Joaquin, we're currently at 81% of average precipitation as of March 18th. This is down 6% since the last board meeting. Next slide, please. And in the Tulare Basin, we currently see 81% of average as of March 18th, which is down 7% since the last board meeting. So in general, across the last few slides, we're trending closer to average in the northern part of the state and seeing less precipitation as we move south. Next slide, please. Now I'll give an update on California's snowpack to date. This series of graphs shown on the slide breaks down the state of our snowpack in the northern, central, and southern Sierra, as well as the statewide total. The bright blue line shows the current percentage of the April 1st average of snowpack, with the red and thin blue lines representing the historic maximum and minimum respectively. The shaded area on each of the 4 graphs shows the average snowpack. I'll just focus on the percentage of normal for this date and note that the percentage of the April 1st average is 2 to 3% lower for each of these numbers. So in the Northern Sierra, we see currently 115% of normal snow water content. In the Central Sierra, we see 99% of normal snow water content. And in the Southern Sierra, we're seeing 94% of normal snow water content. Statewide, we're seeing 103% of the normal snow water content, which is similar to the update that was given at the previous board meeting, down by about 1%. There will be more information to come in the next board meeting about snowpack, since the next major snowpack survey is going to occur on April 1st. Next slide, please. So taking a step back and looking at the entire state, the next 2 slides show trends in precipitation and temperature over the past 3 months. This map is showing precipitation. I think the colors aren't translating super well, but the darker greenish areas are showing higher than average precipitation, and the browner rust-colored areas are showing lower than average precipitation, with the white areas showing average. So as you can see from this chart, it's been wetter than average in the majority of the state over the past 3 months. One exception is that the Sierra Nevada has been at or just above normal precipitation, so not quite as wet as the rest of the state. Next slide, please. Moving on to temperature, the past 90 days have been warmer than average in much of the state. Higher than average temperatures are shown in reddish brown, while cooler than average temperatures are shown in blue on this chart. You may notice that despite the overall warmth and even some record highs in the Central Valley, there have also been lower than average temperatures in the Sierra Nevada, Los Angeles, and the northern part of the state. So seeing some variation throughout the state. All this to say, we'll be watching the temperatures closely as the year progresses to understand potential impacts to snowpack and water supply. Next slide, please. On this slide, we have an overview of the major water supply reservoirs throughout the state. As you can see, as of March 17th, most of the reservoirs are still at or above their historic averages. To focus on a few select south of Delta reservoirs, we have Cachuma, which is currently at 101% of capacity. The Diamond Valley Reservoir is at 92% of capacity, and San Luis Reservoir is at 73% of capacity. Next slide, please. I'll now provide a brief update on the Scott and Shasta River watersheds. As you know, the emergency regulation went into effect on February 1st. As you'll be shown in later slides, flows are still sufficient so that there are no curtailments in effect. However, the inefficient livestock watering prohibition is currently in effect through March. The new provisions generally provide for diversions of up to 10% at the point of diversion following notification to the board and in accordance with the conditions outlined in the regulation. The regulation requires that diversions are operated to avoid disturbing reds and tributaries remain connected to the main stem. Last Tuesday, board staff held 2 meetings in Etna, California to go over the groundwater local cooperative solution requirements and the application form that was developed for this year's program. Per the regulation, applications are due by April 15th and require metering of groundwater wells except under limited circumstances as outlined in the regulation. The workshops were well attended by the agricultural community and others in the watersheds. More information is available on the website, which is listed on this slide. Next slide, please. The Dwinelle Reservoir storage is currently at 69% of reservoir capacity. This is the highest that the reservoir has been since April of 2017, when the storage volume was 46,000 acre feet. In last year, as a point of comparison, the maximum storage volume for Dwinelle Reservoir was 30,463 acre feet. These snow course numbers are the same as shown at the previous board meeting. Snow courses are locations where manual snow measurements are taken during the season to determine the depth and water content of the snowpack. It's likely that the current snowpack is greater than what's reported here due to snowfall that occurred after these measurements were taken. And the snowpack will be measured again at the end of March and the beginning of April, so we should have more up-to-date numbers at the next board meeting. Next slide, please. Here we have the hydrology for the Scott River since the start of the water year on October 1st, 2023. The blue line is showing flows at the Fort Jones gauge. The red line shows the emergency regulation flows, and the green bars show precipitation. As you can see, flows remain above the minimum flow requirement of 200 cubic feet per second. As of this morning, flows at the Fort Jones gauge were 808 cubic feet per second at 6:30 a.m. Based on the California-Nevada River Forecast Center ensemble model for the Scott River, flows are predicted to remain well above the minimum flow requirement for the next 10 days. Next slide, please. Here is the same slide for the Shasta River, looking at the flows at the Wairika gauge. As of this morning, flows at that gauge were 193 cubic feet per second at 7 a.m. Next slide, please. Lastly, I'll give a brief update on where we are so far with groundwater recharge temporary permits. We've received 10 permit applications to date this water year. There are currently 11 permits in effect, 9 of which were approved this year and 2 of which are 5-year permits that were approved last year and are still in effect. In total, these approved permits authorize over 133,000 acre feet of diversions. More than half of that amount is related to the permit that was most recently issued to the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. I believe that occurred on March 11th, so my apologies for the typo on the slide. And so far, there have been no flood recharge diversions reported. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you for your time.
Really appreciate the update, Ms. Warner, and nice to see an average water year just unfolding here in front of us. It feels good. Looking to my fellow board colleagues if there's any questions. We don't have any commenters, so just any discussion at the dais. Vice Chair.
Just a couple of requests. Thank you for the report. It's comprehensive and really good, and the overall good news. So just a couple of requests on recharge permits. I know that we've talked about this at the last meeting and looking to get some additional information, kind of a comprehensive view. And so Mr. Oppenheimer, I think, will be determining, when, how, and in what form, whether it's an information item or through the executive director's report. But I think for our purposes, because reporting is required, it would be helpful to also have information about the acre feet that's actually been diverted. Because these permits, we always need to make sure that the public understands these are for authorizations for diversion, but there are many conditions in the permits, and so it may not play out that those diversions all actually occur. In fact, maybe just a portion, and so helpful just to get more information on that. And then on Scott and Shasta, I think it would be helpful for us to receive information about compliance, because as we saw today in public comment, there are a lot of concerns about compliance. That was just one of many issues that they brought up. So it would be helpful for us to have that information, and also so that the entities out there that we expect to comply are very aware that this is something we're watching closely. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Vice Chair. And plus up the idea here of likely an informational item just on groundwater recharge activities and any data that we're getting on reporting from all of that. And on Scott Shasta. And it maybe in this item, or maybe worth having a larger discussion just on implementation of the emergency regulations, perhaps, and an opportunity, since we heard in public forum, I think a lot of folks wanting to chat on Scott Shasta. Board Member McGuire.
Yes, thank you for the update. As always, very helpful. And I'll just add maybe another request at an appropriate time. There have been a lot of references to the needs for in-stream flows in various streams, and I always appreciate the Scott and Shasta updates. They're very thorough and helpful. Now we're hearing a little bit more discussion about Mill Deer and Antelope Creeks and some others that were called out in the salmon strategy, including this morning. So if, at the right time, if you could please provide an update on those streams as well, and what we know, what we don't know about I know this is the hydrologic conditions update, so what I'm asking about is what are the hydrologic conditions in those streams, some of the others that are becoming more centralized focuses on future work. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member. Looking to other colleagues in case there's any other comment.
Chair Esquivel, I'll point out that Mr. Jocelyn, who we heard from in public forum, has his hand raised, and I think he wanted to address this item as well.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. I appreciate you for flagging that. I actually need to jump on the Zoom platform. Mr. Jocelyn.
Hi, thanks for letting me chime in on the hydrologic update. I was just wanting to mention about the Scott and the Shasta update. We frequently see Dwinell storage pointed out in part of this update, and just thought it would be important to give a little background on that reservoir so that we can put it in perspective as to the importance it plays for irrigators. That reservoir is on the main stem of the Shasta River, and it catches most of the snow melt that comes off of the eddies, which is a mountain range to the west of Mount Shasta. And so while it does play an important role for agriculture, the reservoir actually impacts water quality greatly. And that water is not ideal to be released to the river. And so mentioning its storage capacity, I think for the hydrology of the river is not super important. Right now, if you go to CDEC and monitor reservoir storage, you can see the reservoir is basically peaked out and is losing more on any given day than it gains through leaks in the bottom of the reservoir. And so we don't commonly see the reservoir reach its maximum capacity because of those leaks. This reservoir impacts also the natural hydrologic cycle of the river, eliminating a lot of the winter pulses that would come during high precip events. And what that's done is really impaired a lot of the gravel substrates that the fish need for spawning gravel, and also has impacted riparian vegetation. So because this reservoir is operating under a storage water right, they don't have to bypass flow. And so we will also reach a time where their storage water right ends. That comes, I believe, in June, and no more water will be bypassed. So the Dwinell portion of the hydrologic update, I think I just wanted to add those little bits of information so that people understand that it actually plays almost a detrimental role at times in the Shasta's hydrology, and operates more as a reservoir for irrigators who then use a ditch system to deliver that water, not the river. Thank you for allowing me to chime in.
Easily. Thank you for chiming in, Mr. Jocelyn. I appreciate the comments. All right. Not seeing any further discussion then. Thank you, Ms. Warner. Really appreciate the presentation. Good to see you. That brings us to, let's go ahead and move on to item number 3, which is here now for an item from the Division of Financial Assistance regarding a proposal to amend the state fiscal year 2023-24 Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. Give folks a moment to come up. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Mike Downey. I'm a supervising engineer in the Division of Financial Assistance. I oversee the State Revolving Fund programs and the Water Cycling Funding Program. And like you mentioned, we wanted to bring this item before you today. It's a proposal to amend the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. That's the current intended use plan for the 2023-24 state fiscal year. Next slide, please. That amendment is very specific. It is to provide the Deputy Director of DFA with discretion to reduce the maximum water recycling construction grant. This is something that we're not very excited to do, but I'll explain why we're proposing it on the next slide. So this is a snapshot of the current intended use plan, and the water recycling funding program guidelines set out how to calculate the construction grant amount. It's set at 35% of the estimated construction costs, up to a maximum amount of grant that's to be determined in the intended use plan. So in the intended use plan, we kind of recap that and then set that maximum grant amount. So the current intended use plan set the maximum grant at $15 million per project. And I'll note that we've decided to do that on an annual basis so that we can set the grant amount based on the amount of grant funds we have available and the time frame we have to appropriate those grant funds. So when we adopted this intended use plan in September of last year, we had around $300 million in water cycling grant funds to be committed. Next slide, please. You don't need to read all of these footnotes, but footnote 56 is what we're proposing to amend. Footnote 56 states that the Deputy Director on a case-by-case basis could increase that maximum grant amount for small disadvantaged communities, consistent with the way we calculate grant amounts for small disadvantaged communities for other project types. So what we're proposing is to amend that footnote to also give Deputy Director authority to set a lower grant maximum based on the available funds. And that may sound a little bit vague, but I will explain why we have it set up that way. Next slide, please. So we started the intended use plan and set our grant maximums because we had over $300 million in water cycling grant to administer. Those funds were mostly from the budget acts of 2021, 22, and 23. And the governor released his proposed budget for state fiscal year 24-25 in January with a proposal to reduce the amount that's already been appropriated to the State Water Board for these purposes by $174 million, and then also delay another $100 million. So essentially when that proposal came out, it did freeze those accounts. And so that's $275 million that we do not have access to at the moment until we see what happens in an adopted budget for state fiscal year 24-25. And that won't occur until June at the earliest. So that results in the funds that we have available to commit, a little over $4 million from Prop 1, a little under $2 million from Prop 68, and that leaves $32 million in general fund remaining. So about $38 million, a far cry from where we started this intended use plan. And so frankly, that's not enough to award $15 million per project to the projects that are on the fundable list that we're anticipating receiving some grant funding to support their water recycling projects. Next slide. So what we're proposing is to amend footnote 56, which just grants the deputy director the authority to reduce the maximum grant amount per project based on the anticipated or actual availability of grant funding and based on the demand for such funds. The reason we're doing this now and not in next year's intended use plan is because we do have $32 million in general fund that we believe we can commit now to projects that are ready. And it's at least my impression that the cuts to the general fund for water cycling could be further than what is being proposed by the governor. So we're feeling the urgency to commit and encumber the remaining funds right now. So per the guidelines and intended use plan, we would need to commit to the maximum amount to probably the two most ready projects, and that would leave a big hardship for the remaining projects that we're anticipating some grant funding to move forward with their water recycling projects. So that's the reason that we're bringing this before you today. We want to commit and encumber funds to projects in the next few weeks so that they are encumbered prior to the end of the fiscal year. We are proposing that the maximum planning grant amount remains the same. And I'll add that both of these grant maximums will need to be re-looked at in next year's intended use plan. And that intended use plan would be coming before the board for a board workshop in a few months. Next slide, please. So what we're anticipating this would result in is the ability to encumber funding for 7 construction projects and 7 planning projects that have the eligibility reviews complete and legal concurrence complete. So contemplation of future grant maximums, as I mentioned, would be in next year's intended use plan. Although I will raise the fact that when we're having those discussions, we will not have an adopted state budget for 24-25. So how we handle that and the speculation around the available funds, I think we'll continue to have that conversation. But I think the bottom line is we really don't want to commit to projects with funds that are not available to us. Next slide, please. All right, we've gotten lots of interest from our partner stakeholders. And so I'd like to recap some of the comments that you all may have received and how we're contemplating those or incorporating them into this item. So we heard from plenty of agencies that they're opposed to grant reductions because water cycling projects are expensive and need additional funding to make them viable. Definitely agree with that analysis. Our proposal is to be able to continue to provide funding to as many projects as possible that were already prioritized and on our fundable list. And this proposal will spread the funds to 7 projects instead of 2 projects. We had comments that the Deputy Director's authority to reduce the grant maximum should be confined to the 23-24 intended use plan. Agree with that. This amendment is just for the 23-24 intended use plan, and not anticipating that we would include that in the 24-25, but when we put the 24-25 intended use plan out for public comment, we can evaluate and make sure that that language is correct. We've received comments that the minimum grant award should be no less than $5 million. I know there's a bit of nuance there. Not every project is eligible for $5 million because it's a percentage of the estimated construction cost. But I believe the comment is the maximum grant should be $5 million. So what we're trying to still provide that maximum flexibility. I think the exact numbers on the available funds, we have a pretty strong feeling of what that is, but we've had continued discussions with DOF and others on this proposed budget. And really our goal is to make sure that we commit all of the general fund this fiscal year. Right now with the projects that we've identified, it would be the projects that were eligible for $5 million would be getting $5 million. So that would be a minimum without stating it as a minimum and kind of tying our hands at the last minute trying to encumber these funds. Hopefully that made sense.
So just to clarify, so the projects that were eligible for 15 million initially would now potentially be in the $5 million
That's right.
range. Is that right?
Next slide, please. Preserve 15 million grant max for projects on the fundable list. I suppose this is the same response, which is why it confused me. So again, this would result in funding 2 projects and really wanted to commit to as many projects on the fundable list as possible, which also would not be all the projects on the fundable list. These are the ones that we can encumber funds on today, essentially. All right, last comment I wanted to bring up is stakeholders asked to restore grant funds up to the original amount if funding became available. So, this is a proposed budget, and could the actual adopted budget for 24-25 be different? Certainly, there's potential there. So again, this is to focus on what we need to do now so that we can commit these funds. But it is worth recognizing that the 24-25 intended use plan should also discuss this concept. What we've proposed now is to add to the, there's a change sheet in the back and posted online. That was a very last minute, but we added to the whereas section of the resolution that construction projects, I'll just read it out here, construction projects listed on the intended use plan fundable list and impacted by a reduced maximum water cycling funding program grant may be considered for additional grant or principal forgiveness in the 24-25 Clean Water SRF intended use plan, depending on funding availability. Such consideration applies to those projects for which a financing agreement has been executed, as well those projects with a pending financing agreement. So what this really does is say that the board would consider this in next year's intended use plan and kind of gives a path to projects seeking to be made whole if additional funding was made available. The other thing that this acknowledges is that the water cycling guidelines state that once we've executed an agreement, we're not going to amend and add additional funds. So we would need additional language in next year's IUP that says something along these lines that, you know, hey, we're granting the authority to amend and add additional funds given the right circumstances. I think that depending on the, you know, if there was additional funding that came back, I think it would also depend on the amount of additional funding, you know, before the board made a decision on how to allocate those funds. Like I said, the projects on this year's fundable list, not all of them are included in this commitment to encumber the remaining general fund. So I think there will be, you know, increased competition for whatever remaining grant funds are available for water cycling projects. And with that, I will field any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. I know it's not easy, especially I'm well aware how these grant dollars are sometimes make or break for recycling projects and their affordability for a number of communities out there. So it's not easy for us to have to adjust, but we're here having to contribute to what is a budget deficit and a real challenge out there. So appreciate everyone's, you know, patience, and especially the project proponents around us having to here adjust what we're able to provide. And importantly, you know, we are looking to make sure that for those projects, we don't make it difficult should funding become available to be able to and we can't commit to making folks whole. We can't, you know, we already are here in a situation where, you know, we're overcommitted insofar as what we're actually going to be receiving. We can't keep doing that into the future here, but do want to provide that flexibility for these projects should we be able to see additional funding and be able to help make sure that at least the planning that they were working on doesn't go to naught. So really appreciate the work that's been done on the change sheet for that. I know we have about 10 commenters, but before we go to them, looking to see if any of my fellow board colleagues have anything they want to ask or say here at the top. Okay, seeing none, let us go first to Beth Olhasso, be followed by Deborah Ann Early, and then Victor Early and Jared Voskel.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Beth Olasso on behalf of Water Reuse California. We understand you are as disappointed as we are to have to take this action. We are working hard at the legislature to try to throw some money back in, so cross your fingers. We really appreciate you and your staff working on that change sheet so that we have the ability, should we be successful at the legislature, to move forward and get some more funding. We're going to do everything we can and appreciate your work on this. A lot of important projects that are on the list and are going to be struggling with this action, but you guys are kind of handcuffed. We understand that, and we appreciate your staff working very hard to get those funding agreements in the next couple weeks. I know there's a lot of back and forth going on, and our folks are really trying. They want to get that $5 million, and hopefully I think the devil's going to be in those details on the agreement. So appreciate your staff working overtime to get those worked out. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for working with us on this. Next, I'd like to call up Deborah Ann Early, be followed by Victor Early, Jared Voskuil, and then Hillary Hauser. Good morning. Oh, apologies. You got muted again. You should be invited again to unmute. There you are.
Okay. Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with the board today. I will be speaking in reference to Central Coast Blue, which is a Central Coast project in our region. And, specifically, I just want to say that the concept of being able to get grant money is critical for this project. And also, I think it is causing, a lot of, I would say, conflict in the region. So what I would like the board to kind of consider are some of the independent views that we've identified and really recommend to the board to do a deeper investigation yourselves, and then to also consider these factors as part of your review, not only of the Prop 1, but also the recycle program. I am a CPA by trade. I've worked in finance and compliance for over 25 years. And so when I took a look at this particular project and looked at the grant applications, I immediately noticed some items and red flags in my mind relating to inaccurate statements and also misleading statements. And that drew me in further to continue to really review the application. There are a number of inaccuracies and incorrect statements relating to DACs in severe disadvantaged communities that are inflated and actually, really try to influence a regional approach, which is not actually happening in order to obtain grant money. And grant money has been obtained already for planning that was used in a DAC community for infrastructure. And just to, again, go back, these grants are being, touted as a regional benefit. Oceana, which is a disadvantaged community, is cited as a partner and a beneficial stakeholder in the grants. DAC information is used. However, they have opted out of this project because of the cost and because they do not need the water. However, the infrastructure of this project is running right through their community. That was done without informing residents and the people in that community. So that is starting to rise up to the top. The actual project, we were at a CCB meeting last night, is on pause. The costs have grown 50% in a year, and they have identified the need for community involvement because of many of the issues that I'm describing. To make matters worse, the allocation of the water rights or the water use is actually, through this project, getting moved over from a disadvantaged community into a more affluent community. And the way that they're doing that is by inflating the amount of water that is purported for the program. They put in 900 acre feet, but somehow they get out 1420. And so that differential is actually hurting the disadvantaged community. In a drought, that could become even magnified even further, because that additional amount appears to be a priority claim. So again, some serious considerations. I think you heard from Debbie earlier. Another city, Grover Beach, is struggling to pay for this with or without grants. It is just extremely expensive compared to some of the research that I've done. The amount of actual recycled water is low relative to the amount of this project. So again, just kind of recommend to, take this DAC information, which I think is significant and problematic, into consideration as you continue to look at the funding. And in particular, understand, again, grant funds could be good. They could be good for certain projects. we ask you to enforce that your applicants are including true, accurate information and include full conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Early. I really appreciate your comments and flagging your concerns. I'm looking over to our Chief Deputy, Mr. Jonathan
Just
Bishop.
want to make sure the board recognizes that this is not one of the 7 projects that were being discussed. It is on the intended use plan, but it's not ready for funding at this point. So it's not part of this decision.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. And thank you again, Ms. Early. Next, I'd like to call Victor Early, be followed by Jared Voskuil, and then Hillary Hauser.
Good morning, board. My name is Victor Early, and I'm a certified engineering geologist, and I've taken a look at the Central Coast Blue project pretty deeply. And this project is being touted as a regional water recycling project. However, they've reduced the number of injection wells from 5 down to 3, and those 3 injection wells are along the coastline, and they're clustered near a Pismo Beach production well to allow them to pump more. So when they inject this highly expensive treated water into the aquifer along the shoreline, they're going to lose about 30% of that to the ocean. So they're spending a huge amount of money to treat this water, but 30% of it is probably just going to go out to the ocean. They could simply remedy that and shoot for 100% back into the aquifer by moving their injection wells just a little bit inland to inject into the aquifer. Secondly, this project is being touted as a drought resiliency project. This aquifer has very little storage, meaning that the amount that can be pumped out has to equal the amount that comes in on an annual basis. When they do this during a drought condition, this aquifer would deplete rather quickly because there's very little storage. And they're trying to sell this project to the community as drought resiliency, and that's just not correct in my view. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Early. Next, I'd like to call up Jared Voskuil, be followed by Hillary Hauser, and then Alexandra Ganell.
Hi, good morning. Jared Voskuil on behalf of CASA, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. CASA represents over 130 wastewater agencies that provide the collection, treatment, resource recovery, and recycling of wastewater. We appreciate the opportunity to comment this morning, and kind of given this situation, the discussion we're having here in this meeting about this, we would just want to confirm that we recognize you've been dealt an unfortunate situation, and trying to manage it. You all have done an excellent job in communicating with us on this. Seeing on your slides that only 2 projects were going to get it, but the way this authority will allow you to get it to 7 projects potentially really reiterates your interest in doing what we can for water recycling. That additional change sheet modification also, we feel like, is the other side of that, kind of really opens the door to ensure if funding's available, these projects that are impacted will still maintain that benefit. And so we think that's commendable, and we recognize that. I'll also note we do have members testifying today, and they can share about what these impacts do mean for them. Not that it's lost on you all, but just that we think it's important for them to relay what they go through every year locally to plan on these projects. And so having these types of shifts, they can communicate that impact. But in this instance, we certainly recognize and know this is not the board taking this away. This is the board being an excellent steward of what they do have to provide that to these projects to realize these goals. So with that, thank you for your time.
Really appreciate that, Mr. Voskuil. Appreciate the engagement and continued advocacy around this important investments. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Hillary Hauser, be followed by Alexandra Ganell, Jesse Kane, and then Jeff English. Oh, Ms. Hauser, you should be invited to unmute as well.
Okay.
There you are. Good morning.
Morning,
Good to see you.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel, members of the board. Hillary Hauser, the Executive Director of Heal the Ocean in Santa Barbara. And we really cherish our 20-year relationship with the State Board on everything from ABA 5 development of septic regulation, input into the GeoTracker program, and mainly our work with the board on recycled water. And the issue before you, the cutting of projects and funds from your list, we can understand the situation, but I really want to urge the board to leave the Carpinteria Valley Water District and Sanitary District CAP program. It's on this list. It just can't, because it's so important, this project, not just to Carpinteria Valley, but to the entire South Coast as a water supply, because it's not just for Carpinteria, it's for the region. And it also, this project protects the water that is there from saltwater intrusion. And realizing that there are many projects vying to stay on this list proposed by the Division of Financial Assistance, I, Heal the Ocean urges you, please to leave this CAP Carpinteria Valley Carpinteria Sanitary District project on the list today, because it would be a disaster to slow it down, stop it. It needs to proceed as it is. And I really appreciate the opportunity to beg you and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, Ms. Hauser, and for advocating for this important project. I know all these projects are really critical, and again, the funding is key. I'd also note, I know our Division of Financial Assistance is working with project proponents to also just understand what other resources we might have to be able to help fill that financial gap, whether it's additional loan, an opportunity for principal forgiveness, perhaps. So just appreciate your advocacy here, and thanks for the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Alexandra Ganell, who will be followed by Jesse Kane, Jeff English, and then Robert McDonald.
Chair Esquivel and members of the board, good morning. I'm Alexandra Ganell, the Loans and Grants Director for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. On behalf of the SFPC, thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on this important item. We were, as many, disappointed to hear about the impact of the governor's proposed budget, but we do understand the challenges that this presents for the water recycling funding program. So we support your staff's recommendation to amend this year's IUP, as we understand the need to provide the deputy director with the discretion to reduce the maximum grant amount for water recycling funding, water recycling construction projects. And we support the revised resolution that includes a mechanism to add back funding to any project impacted by this reduction, if in the future funds do become available. Again, thanks for consideration of our feedback as we implement our critical water recycling projects to diversify and improve the reliability of our water supply. We're committed to continuing to work with you to ensure we're honoring our commitment to ratepayer affordability. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Ganell. I appreciate the leadership and engaging with us here on this, and the support, and look forward to what I know is further discussion on how we can continue to make sure we support these projects. So thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Jesse Kane, be followed by Jeff English, Robert McDonald, and then I believe that's our last commenter at that point.
Good morning. I'd first like to start off by thanking the staff, the board staff, and working with the city of Colusa for a number of years and where we're at today. So start out by, I'm Jesse Kane. I'm the city manager for the city of Colusa. I'm also the chief plant operator as well. I wear a few hats there. So the city of Colusa is a severely disadvantaged community. It's located north of Sacramento, about an hour. We are largely an agricultural community and a population of 6,500. We have several low-interest SRF loans totaling over $26 million over the last 15 years, and almost 40% of our rates go just strictly to pay our loans. Our current cert rate for our homeowner right now is $105 per month, and that's to cover the debt service that we currently have. So grants are essential to the city of Colusa moving forward. We've been in the planning and designing a project for the last several years that would take our tertiary treated wastewater and apply to nearby farmland, parks, and industrial customers in town. Our project is shovel-ready, and our application is complete and approved by staff. When the Small Communities Grant Program budget was slashed last year, our project was moved over to the water recycling program because it was better funded, and now these cuts will likely jeopardize our ability to fund and launch this entire project. In our last updated project, we had to increase our rates to over $105. The current City of Colusa rates are over the 2% median household income, and I don't see any projects on the fundable list today that's been talked about that any of them are looking at raising the rates to make the project happen. So I know the board has a priority to fund disadvantaged communities like Colusa, and I can tell you firsthand that this last year's cuts to small communities grants and now these cuts to the water recycling program make it difficult for us and others to launch these needed upgrades. Low or no interest loans cannot fund these projects alone. Small disadvantaged communities like Colusa can't generate much capital off of rates. So yeah, that's pretty much, I just wanted to, kind of point that out where we're at. And I believe we're one of the 7 on the list, and the staff has been really good working with us and seeing what we can do and get stuff done. So that's it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kane. I appreciate your local leadership and ensuring that, I know, like you said, you wear many hats. I know for our smaller systems, there's these grant dollars are make or break for the affordability of water in communities. So I appreciate you coming forward, appreciate that leadership, and do know, again, the Division of Financial Assistance, as you've said, we're here to work and try to figure out how best to make sure these projects go forward. And importantly, we keep an eye on the issue of affordability in our communities for sure. So thank you. Really appreciate that leadership. Next, I'd like to call up Jeff English, and then our last commenter here, I believe, is going to be Robert McDonald.
Chair Esquivel, members of the board, I first want to thank you for the opportunity to talk on this. And I want to say, I don't know that I've ever heard of a gentleman being a city manager and the chief plant operator. That's quite the combination. I'm the general manager for the Central Coast Blue Regional Recycled Water Authority project. It's a mouthful. And I know that we're not one of the funded projects on your list that you're proposing. However, I do want to comment on something that you said earlier about how this reduction in grant funds really has a significant impact on smaller projects, particularly like ours. You've heard from a couple folks in our community who are opposed to the project primarily because of cost, and we have gone through, our partners have gone through 218 processes to raise their rates, and it hurts. Those rates are pushing the limit for some of our communities, and so these grant funds are critical for the future of our projects. What I want to recommend today is that you include that change sheet number 1, which will allow for the projects that were considered for full funding this year in this cycle to receive priority funding for the next cycle. Our project is 90% designed. It is a groundwater recharge, indirect potable recharge project, excuse me, that will also serve as a seawater barrier intrusion project. It's a crucial project for our water supply. We are taking a pause. We're looking at options to cover our funding deficit as a result of this loss. And so it's crucial. Some of these recharge projects for smaller communities won't move forward. These water reuse projects won't move forward without the grant funds that we had expected and that were included in our rate studies. So I strongly encourage you to include that change sheet number 1 so that we can look at possible funding in the next cycle. We're looking at value engineering. We're doing everything we can to bring this project in as an affordable project, but want to strongly encourage that change sheet as part. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for yours as well, Mr. English. Appreciate you appearing before the board here and your leadership around this project and the work. Thank you. And last, I'd like to call Robert McDonald.
Yeah, good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members. So I won't go through all of my points, but with the change sheet, I just want to say thank you, and we wholly support that change. We believe that we're like you, victims of timing, and unfortunately, we're on the wrong side of that. And you know, we understand that because of budget shortfalls, this is sort of the choice that we have to make. I do believe that even with the prices of construction escalating at a record high, and these projects are, you know, going up double in a matter of a few years, these projects are still necessary, and they're going to be worth it. We just have to keep our eyes on the long side goal. You know, in Carpinteria, we have 3 water supplies, and in 2016, 2 of those water supplies disappeared on us very rapidly. And so I think that putting our heads in the sand and not doing anything about that is a mistake. And I think, you know, although it's going to be painful rate-wise, we will be doing about 33% increases in rates. And so I sympathize with the other 7 projects. I think we're all in the same boat. We're all going to have to raise rates. We're going to have to go through the pain of that with our community. But again, I think it's worth it. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that change. I think that's very helpful, and we understand the position that that you all are in. Thank you. And oh, and thanks to the staff. They've been great to work with.
Really appreciate that, Mr. McDonald. Appreciate you coming up here and providing, again, your important perspective as a project manager, as a leader, and agree with you that part of our challenge right now are just the incredible cost increase. We continue to see the demand for these dollars, and the projects are only going to continue to grow as we see, again, what are a lot of increases in just the costs for these projects. So just thank you. Appreciate your presence, your advocacy, and leadership. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our commenters here, and appreciate everyone who has commented on the item. I'm looking to my fellow board colleagues if there's any questions, any comments and thought further, and if not, we may be prepared for a motion.
Excuse me.
Oh, please, Mr. Austin.
Chair Esquivel, yes. I just wanted to flag, in the interest of as much clarity as possible and transparency, there was a minor insignificant typo in the change sheet, and I wanted to read it into the record, the correction, and then I'll work with the clerk to make that correction to the resolution. But in the change sheet, in the last sentence, it should read as well as those projects with a pending financing agreement. So again, just for clarity, thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Austin. With that read in, I think we may be prepared for a motion.
I'll make a motion I'll make a motion including the change sheet with the correction as read into the record.
Board member.
Second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Excuse me. Board Member Morgan?
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
Board Member McGuire?
Aye.
Board Member Firestone?
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The vote carries and the item is adopted. Again, appreciate everyone's good work, and difficult I know as it is, and look forward to what is further discussion here in the next year's IUP coming up soon. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a break here before we get into then our last item before board member reports. And just a 10-minute break is fine, so let's get back here at 10:45. Thank you, everyone. I think we're ready to come back. Thanks everyone for the break. It is 10:45 and we can continue on to item number 4. And this is an item from the Division of Administrative Services regarding our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act fees. I think I'll kick it over to David Ceccarelli. Or perhaps not. John Russell, sorry.
I'll do a
my
little
My script
introduction
says David, so I apologize, John.
No problem.
Good to see you, Mr. Russell.
Good morning, Chair and board members. My name is John Russell. I'm the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. With me today is David Ceccarelli, who is the head of our Fees and Revenue Branch, and David Rose, our attorney from the Office of Chief Counsel. Before you today is a proposal to amend the fees for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act program, and I'll just say SIGMA from now on instead of the whole thing. The proposal itself is relatively simple and straightforward. It's a decrease in the fee for the volumetric portion of the fee schedule for the volume of groundwater extracted. We are not proposing any other changes to the previously established fee framework or the other fee amounts in the SIGMA program at this time. Before David gets into the nuts and bolts of the proposals, I wanted to highlight a few things, and they're mainly just sort of an FYI highlight. The first one, as you are aware, this request is coming out of our usual fee cycle. Typically, we come to you in September to do the fees. This one's a little out of cycle, and one of the consequences of that is that we have not gone through our entire stakeholder process that we usually do before we come to you with the fees. Typically, we have three meetings with our general fee or stakeholders, and typically we also have ancillary meetings with individual groups as well. We have not done that this time. We don't think that truncation of our process is material to the proposal itself, but I just wanted to note that for you in case it is brought up by any of the commenters. Program staff, though, has been meeting quite a bit with the fee payers, obviously, throughout the last couple of years, and this has been a topic of discussion for them. More significantly, we have limited historical information for this fee adjustment. As you know, typically we base all our fees on models that incorporate both our revenue projections based on historical data. Since this is a fairly new program and no basins are in probation yet, we don't really have the data to support this. And that's, again, it's just a heads up that over the next year or two, we will be gathering that data, and we'll do our typical process that we do with any fee program. Is as the data comes in, we'll evaluate it and monitor it, and then we may be coming back to you again with a proposed fee change based on that. One other significant thing for that, because of the way, or because of the timing of when basins may or may not go into probation, and I don't want to presuppose that they will, but based on the timing of when they might go into probation and the fees being collected on a water calendar year, it's likely that we really won't know what the overall fee revenue is going to be from this program for probably a year and a half, maybe even 2 years once we get into a full cycle of this. So as I mentioned, during that time period, we will be evaluating and monitoring all this, but we are unlikely to be coming back to you in September with another fee adjustment because we just won't have the data. So as I just said, if one or more of the basins do go into probation, we'll be monitoring that fee amount, and we will likely come back to you with with a fee adjustment to the fee amounts themselves. But we could also potentially be coming back to you at some point with some proposed changes to the fee framework. As David will mention here in a minute or two, several of the commenters had proposed changes to the fee framework itself, notably some exemptions from paying fees based on certain criteria. And we think that those, on the face of it, those proposals are reasonable, and they certainly merit consideration, both from a policy perspective and from a financial perspective. So we'll be looking at those as well And at some point, as we'll work with program, obviously, and we may come back to you with some changes to the fee framework itself. So in summation, that's just a long way of saying this is all going to be an evolutionary process over the next couple of years, as it is with any of our new fee programs. But we'll be monitoring it and tracking it and keeping you up to date and closely working with program in the interim. And with that, I'll hand it over to David, who will get into the nuts and bolts of our presentation.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, John. Board Chair Esquivel, fellow board members, David Ceccarelli from the Fee Revenue Branch of the Division of Administrative Services. Next slide, please. I just want to touch kind of our presentation today relates to a little bit of background, our staff's proposal, of course, some of the funding scenarios we looked at, the challenges in the fee setting process, moving forward, the comments that we received, and of course, opening it up to questions. Next slide, please. So the State Water Board has the authority to protect groundwater resources through state intervention and collect extraction reports and fees when either there are areas of SWRCB basins are not managed by a groundwater sustainable agency, or the State Water Board finds that the basin's management is deficient and designates the basin as probationary at a hearing. Currently, no basins have been declared probationary to date. The current SWRCB fee schedule was adopted in 2017, and since then there's been minor changes. Concerns, of course, over collection at the current fee rate arose after the California Department of Water Resources triggered specific basins to be considered for probationary status. Next slide, please.
If I can add, Mr. Ceccarelli, that's okay. Just out of continued context there, when we first set those fees, it's because we were anticipating, as you noted, actual basins not being managed. So the amount that we were setting at was really if we were going to have to go in as essentially a SWRCB agency and manage a basin or part of a basin. So this is now the first time that we're really looking back at this now that we're in a different phase, if you will, of SWRCB, where these the inadequate basins that are being brought to us, we're not looking to replace an agency. We're looking to accommodate what our work is on this side of it. So just for what it's worth. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Staff proposal. So under our budgetary authority, which is authorized in the Budget Act, we identified that to support the SWRCB program costs and expenditures, the required revenue is $5.5 million. And currently, the fee is $300 per well plus $40 per acre foot of groundwater extracted. I do want to mention that if there's no extractions, there's no fee. So inactive wells are not counted. Our proposed fee is, we're not proposing to change the base fee, so will remain the $300 per well, but we're looking at cutting the volumetric fee in half from $40 to $20 per acre foot of groundwater extracted. And then there are no changes proposed for any other elements of the SWRCB extraction reporting fees. So just to recap, staff is proposing to adjust the per acre foot charge from $40 to $20. Next slide, please. So question is basically, and we've asked from the stakeholders, how do we come up with this funding scenario? We worked on putting together program staff and the fee staff put together several different scenarios, and highlighted here are 5 different scenarios, A through Z. And as I mentioned before, of course, there's not yet been any basins declared probationary to date, but the State Water Board has identified a hearing date for 1 basin and tentatively identified hearing dates for 3 others between April 2024 and January of 2025. To recommend the $20 per acre foot to the board, we ran scenarios with the 4 potential basins under various assumptions. One being timing, when the board could put basins on probation. to approximate extraction volumes for each of the basins. Looking at possibly delays in reporting, and then also the possible delays in payments. We recognize that this is a new program, so it's hard to predict beforehand whether we'll see similar payment percentages as we do for some of our established fee programs here at the board. So a value was proposed that appears likely to raise sufficient revenue to cover the fee-funded work as directed by the legislature. And given the uncertainties around collections and how many basins may be put into a probational status and when, reporting requirements are assumed to begin 90 days after a board determination, and reporting is on a water year. The water year is from October 1st through September 30th. So based on the timing when a basin is put on probation, revenues are expected to be lower the first year since a basin may be reporting on a partial water year. Revenues in later years are expected to be higher than in the first year since the basins would be reporting on a full water year, assuming basins remain on probation. So walking through some of these scenarios, when you look at scenario A, and this basically has one basin on probation, and recognizing that in fiscal year 25-26, because this is going to be based on a partial water year, we're looking to collect around 1.7 million. But as we drive that through a whole water year, we're projected to collect $5.5 million. And that's the driving number. That's the number that we're trying to hit to cover our program expenditures, 5.5 million. And as you look through the scenarios, what scenario B is that the first and second basins are put on probation. And I'm sorry, let me take a one step back here. When I look at scenario A, so scenario A is the first basins are put on probation and the rest fix issues or their hearings are delayed. So as you get into the out years, into years 26, 27, and 27, 28, again, this is just assuming one basin is on probation. On scenario B, this is basically showing that the first and second basins are put on probation. And so we definitely see in the second year and the out years that that we would be collecting more than our needed revenue. And I think that goes through with the multiple of the different scenarios. Scenario C is saying first four basins determine probationary on current hearing schedule. Scenario D is the second and fourth basins are put on probation, which basically means that there would be no revenue in 25-26. And same with the scenario E, which board delays decision on the first basin for 3 months, but puts all four basins on probation. So we'd be paying for 26-27 and 27-28, the basins would be paying on a full water year. And we, as staff, we recognize as you look at these numbers, they start to creep up and they start to become higher than what we are authorized to spend. We do recognize in our numbers that we will need some type of reserve, and for uncertainties, of course, and economic uncertainties and so forth, and knowing that basis will be potentially coming in and out. We don't exactly know what that number is going to be right now, but as John mentioned, as we go through a year and a half and we start to collect the revenues, then we'll be looking at figuring out kind of that sweet spot of where we believe that the reserves should be. We also, as John mentioned, one way to, again, to help reduce this, of course, is once we start to get the basins in and we start seeing what the revenue stream looks like, that we have the opportunity to come back to the board and make adjustments in our fee structure. And we've looked at kind of different options and different scenarios, of course, lowering the overall fee, potentially even having maybe a fee per basin, basically. And so we definitely would have to, again, run those options, work with the stakeholders through the stakeholder process, and again, kind of determine kind of, where we land on where the funding comes. But again, there's definitely a lot of uncertainties at this point, but we had to kind of run some assumptions to kind of to figure out where we land on these numbers. Next slide, please. So again, this brings me to the challenges, and it's just the challenges of figuring out where we may land on the fees. SGMA is a new program and different from their existing fee-funded programs, resulting in significant unknowns. Again, whether basins will be declared probationary and when, how long a basin may require state intervention, what the extraction levels are going to be, and the potential timing of reporting and fee payments. Next slide. So moving forward, revenue is deposited into the Water Rights Fund, but is only authorized for the SGMA work regarding state intervention. The fee unit staff will regularly monitor the SGMA fee revenue and any revenues reserves from prior collections as part of the annual review of the Water Rights Fund. We bring this up because it's important that we're not commingling the revenues with the SGMA program with the activities for the water rights program regulatory activities. And so staff is going to monitor it closely, and again, needing to separate it. We also have to report it to the Department of Finance on our water rights fund conditions, and and understand that Department of Finance understands that not all this revenue is coming from water rights activities, license and permits on that side of house, fees, and then also from the SGMA fee revenue. So we'll definitely continue those conversations with the Department of Finance on our reporting requirements. And then comments received. I really wanted to just mainly touch on the names basically that we did receive from the West Side Water Authority. We received a comment letter. We received a comment letter from West Kern Water District, and then from a collective letter from the Kern Fan Banking Projects. And again, all the comment letters did support us on the fee adjustment. They also want to continue to work with us as we go forward through the process. They also looking for requesting fee exemptions as we look through the process and looking at changing the fee framework as we look at things like surface water and disadvantaged communities. And again, those are items that we want to bring to the table and start having discussions as we move forward in the process. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and be happy to help answer any questions at this point.
I appreciate the presentation and just the thoughtful work I know that went into this. It is here a bit of tea leaf reading, and it is not, we're going to need to continue to make adjustment. The reality is it's still a question whether or not this board will bring in any basins into probation. And so what we look like in the next year, where we are, we're just going to have to be very open, I know, here to discussion. I appreciate the letters desiring some adjustment to the framework. I think there's definitely a room and space for discussion around all that. But right now, the desire before we go into that probationary hearing is to make sure that we make this adjustment so it doesn't become much of a distraction to the actual discussion on probation. And we right-size, again, our expectation around fees, given that we're in a different phase of implementation of SGMA. And here, this isn't fees to be able to manage a basin, it's fees to respond to inadequate groundwater sustainability plans. So just thanks, I appreciated all the discussion I know that's gone into it. Mr. Rose, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I wanted to provide one contextual reminder regarding the comment letters that were received. First of all, as I'm sure you recall, there is a disadvantaged community waiver process already in the fee regulation. But also some of those questions that John and David said we'll revisit about surface water. Those are, I think all of the commenters were making comments from the perspective of a different basin than the first two that have been scheduled for hearing. So the Kern Basin. And so those issues, I think, have a resolution already in the current fee structure. such that the fees would be applied to groundwater pumping as opposed to extraction of surface water that was put into underground storage. Even though there is, I think, something in place already to address that issue, I don't believe that that's an issue that's going to come up in either of the first two basins that have already been scheduled. So those conversations can occur through the fee stakeholder process or other SGMA-related processes and wouldn't be implicated right now. So I just wanted to flag that. And if you have further questions or after the commenters speak, we could discuss further if needed.
Appreciate that flag, Mr. Rose, and believe we'll definitely have further comment and discussion on that. So thank you. Looking to Vice Chair.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you all for bringing this to us, because I think that this shows that we've been listening. These issues have come up at, every meeting, every workshop we've had, and I agree, it can be a bit of a distraction, but if you're down in those communities and concerned about probation, it becomes very real. And I think this shows that, we've been taking this to heart, provided, a thoughtful, you're providing us with a thoughtful proposal, and we're being responsive. So thank you for that. And mainly also that we're doing this before the April hearing so that we can really be focused on the issues before us that'll be coming before us in April. So with respect to, I just had a couple of questions, and Mr. Rose, thank you for that clarification. I think that the letters that we received raised they're concerned, and we want these recharge projects to be incentivized. We don't want to disincentivize them. And so I'm glad to know that you're working through and communicating that as appropriate. One of the things that I think would be helpful, because I suspect that we're going to hear some comments on this, and we are going to continue to hear comments on this notion of, well, we went first, so we're shouldering the burden for others, or our basin is different and doesn't cost as much because we have other programs in place, or it's just not going to be as resource intensive. And when this comes up, I always try, not very artfully, but to explain that we're a fee-based program and that we need to collect the fees to pay for the program, and it's not any one component of the program. However, as I think you all have said, you're very open, and so are we, as to different frameworks that would make things, more equitable. And I just want to make sure that, first of all, for you to describe more clearly what I just attempted to describe about how the fee program works. But then secondly, even if we may not do anything for a couple of years, we have the stakeholder process. And so this, starting with this budget year cycle, you will be providing the information like you just did at the fee stakeholder meetings, even if the recommendation is not to do anything just yet because we have to collect some fees and start the program. I think that reassurance is helpful, for folks to hear, and also bringing them into this process, because a lot of these folks are already engaged through irrigated lands, but not all.
Just to address, of course, the stakeholder process, definitely we look to inviting the groups to the water rights stakeholder process again, which is, we have 3 times a year. Our next one will be coming up in June. I will state that 2 weeks ago, when we had a stakeholder meeting, it was on the agenda. We brought it up. We had some discussion. It was more or less just letting them know that as we move forward, that this is going to be the space and the forum. We have our LIRISs for the water rights folks. We've been working with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Program to ensure that the agendas go out to the list of the SGMA stakeholders. And definitely the starting talking points will be starting with the scenarios and how we came up with the numbers. And then just more dialogue on the process of adopting our fees, and then again listening to their concerns and if there are potential areas of changing the actual structure and starting those conversations. But we definitely want to build them into our regular stakeholder process.
Yeah, and And I think further context is the 5.5 million that David identified, that's not the entire Sigma program. That's the component that the legislature identified as fee funded under this Chapter 11 work for state intervention. And so you're right, there are large questions about how the different basins, whenever, if the board declares them probationary, would pay into that, and whether that is fairly flat between them or how it works. But somebody will inevitably have to go first if anybody is declared probationary, and the legislature said that this is fee funded. So that's what we're trying to figure out. I do think that one advantage of doing this one off cycle is that we may be able to use the existing fee cycle or also off cycle as needed to answer some of these questions once we get some actual information. Right now we have a lot of projections and what ifs, and the thing that's known is what amount needs to be recovered for annually, but we don't know from whom and how much. But what we did, I don't want to say no, but evaluate and we think we concluded is that the fee structure without this change at $40 per acre foot volumetric was likely to over-collect. And so as we hit the first group, whoever that is, we didn't want to have that be an over-collection, because like with the usual fee rules, we're trying to avoid wild swings between years. And even more so for this, because in other fee programs, it may all come out in the wash because the fee payers are paying over and over again for multiple years. Whereas for this one, we don't know whether any particular basin or fee payer will be in for a partial year, a full year, more than 1 year. So that was the basis for not a huge change, like a structural change, because we don't know yet. But I think everything is on the table once we get a little bit of the on-the-ground information. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Board Member Morgan.
If I could just follow up, just for clarification, the regular fee stakeholder process, can you just go over the timeline of when the meetings occur and then when it's anticipated, when you usually bring the fees to the board for consideration?
So the board, the fees are brought to for consideration adoption in the second board meeting in September annually. And our stakeholder process is based on the iterations of the governor's budget. So the first proposal of the governor's budget is the governor's proposed budget, which is usually January 10th. And normally about 2 months after that is our first stakeholder meeting, so usually 1st of March. And then the May revise comes out usually around May 15th. And then normally around June or so, we have our second stakeholder meeting. And then the enacted budget, which would normally be July 1, traditionally. And then a month after that, 30 days, and we definitely need to get about a 30-day timeline, August, because at that point then we're in discussions, of course, with the board on proposals and staff recommendations and so forth, and to take our item to the board in September. So again, the stakeholder processes meetings are usually March, June, August, and then taking the proposal to the board in September.
And those are our three primary stakeholder meetings with the large group, the water quality fee stakeholders, the water rights fee stakeholders, the drinking water. A lot of individual groups or programs want to have sort of sidebar conversations with us. And we do that pretty often too, where we meet specifically with a programmatic element of the stakeholders so that we're getting into the real nitty-gritty of the fee discussion.
Thank you. Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate you bringing this item to us today. I completely support the recommendation and in particular the timing of it and getting this out before the board moves forward with any consideration of probationary basins, and acknowledging completely that there's a lot of unknowns here and moving parts, and it's a little bit of a delicate dance ensuring that the revenue meets the fee expectations. So thank you for that. And thank you for the openness to the looking at the structure and working with the stakeholders. I do think here we need to suss out who that stakeholder group is that really is interested in engaging here. So your openness to meeting maybe in a separate discussion apart from the regular fee stakeholder process might be beneficial here as things kind of get off the ground in the near future. So thank you for that. My question is in reference to the disadvantaged community consideration. You mentioned that there is a waiver process in the regulations. I appreciate you bringing that up. But it sounds like there's some confusion about that and who's eligible and how one might apply and when. So I don't know if you have all those answers today, but is that information available, and can we just be more clear and definite about how one might be considered for that kind of opportunity?
Yeah, I can't be definite about who it applies to or any individual entity, whether they qualify or not, without knowing that. But in the existing regulations in section 1044, the process for a waiver is identified. It doesn't get into kind of a nuts and bolts, but really the intent, I think, is that somebody asks for a waiver, and if they meet the qualifications, either a low-income resident, public school, which I think you probably recall was added in the last regulation cycle as well, or public water system or state small water system serving a disadvantaged community where the primary purpose is providing water for human consumption, cooking, and sanitation purposes. So if anybody thinks that they may be qualifying for that or wants to know or wants a change to what that is, which of course the board would decide, but we could, staff level, we could answer the questions of whether we think that they qualify under that definition. They can reach out at any time. Of course, that only kicks in if their basin is declared probationary and the board doesn't adopt any exclusions for any groups or anything that would otherwise cover them. So the simplest answer is that the regulation specifies what I just said, and then part two is ask staff and we'll help them.
Yeah,
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that does. And anything we can do to just communicate that opportunity exists. I know many of these communities have very tight budgets, have challenging rates, have to deal with lots of different competing demands for very limited revenues. So as they're trying to work through their budgeting cycle as well, the more that we can help explain to them what steps they might need to do, pass to be eligible for this or to figure out if they even are, I think is going to be very helpful. So thank you.
Will do. I mean, I think up until now it was somewhat hypothetical, and it still is as to which basins, if any, would be declared probationary. But out of the 6 that have made it into our process from Department of Water Resources, I think that now is definitely a window for somebody to reach out. And staff, there are a lot of staff who can answer those questions very specifically.
Thank you, board member. Thank you, Mr. Rose. Not seeing any further discussion here at the dais. We do have a few commenters and probably room for obviously more discussion thereafter. Here, I'd like to call up first Bob Gore, be followed by Cinnamon Cruz, be followed by Soren Nelson and Ricardo Ortega. No, now it should be.
There we go. Now it is.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gore.
Good morning still. Bob Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of Modesto Irrigation, Kings River entities, Kern County Water, and the California Association of Wine Grape Growers. The words of the chair and the vice chair are very well taken. As from staff, this has been a very continuing, collaborative, and positive program. The last fee pair session, Eric Ekdahl was masterful in his transparency and detail, and we should be well acquainted. I will say, personally, if somebody stands at this mic in the future and says they didn't know, they have no excuse. This has been a continuing and wonderful process. There are some concerns among the ad hoc rump group we've put together at Karen Mogus's urging to examine the whole irrigated lands program structure. The concerns are the reserve fund for the enforcement fee. How will that be put into place? Will it be too much? Who bears the burden? The typical concerns, but it will have to be addressed. Overall, and this is partially a DWR issue, the aggregate impact of the GSA fees, along with ag lands fees, that's very much a concern because the GSA fees are unknown and won't be cheap. That's fairly obvious. And then lastly, the idea of a fee, an enforcement fee structured per basin, per solution is an excellent one because it also coincides with the original obiter dicta from Governor Brown that SGMA was a local program and should be kept as such. And again, thank you, and thank you to those folks who are running the fee payer process. It's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guerra. Appreciate that. And yeah, as the Vice Chair said, this is now a new program, but we're looking to align it with our fee process generally insofar as just the continual touch base that we do, the transparency, and the opportunity to make sure we're showing you all of our homework as folks have questions. So appreciate that. Next, I'd like to call up Cinnamon Cruz, be followed by Soren Nelson and Ricardo Ortega. Okay. Ms. Cruz, if you're viewing from one of the webcasts and having trouble getting on the platform, please do reach out to the clerk of the board and she can help you at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov. Next, then, we'll go to Soren Nelson, be followed by Ricardo Ortega and Jeff Wyrick.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members. It's nice to be with you. Also nice to be talking about something in SGMA that we generally all agree on. I wanted to acknowledge the board's leadership on this. I think you all got a lot of feedback during your road tour last year that this was an issue that needed to be addressed, and something you heard from us as well. And so it's really nice to see that it's being addressed. I know you're not all awash in free time these days. It's hard to think of a state agency with more of a workload. So we really appreciate that you've given the attention to this that it deserves. I think, as you know, SGMA creates some pretty significant economic challenges for the communities that are now experiencing its full implementation. And as state funding goes away, GSAs will continue to lean more heavily on their own fee authority. And so I think, as some other commenters have pointed to, the aggregate effect of that is going to be a challenge for some folks. And so getting this number right is going to be an iterative process. Know that this is just the first starting point, and we're probably going to be back here as we have better data to support updates to that. So appreciate that acknowledgement. Something that I think would be helpful in future iterations of this process, if the board's able to share some of its thinking on how it gets to that new number and share the source of the costs and some of the data points it has on where that revenue is going to come from, I think that will help the conversation be a little bit more substantial. So thank you very much for this, and have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Appreciate the engagement and those comments, and look forward to what I know is future discussion. Mr. Ortega.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. Ricardo Ortega, I'm the General Manager of the Grassland Water District and also the Grassland Groundwater Sustainability Agency within the Delta Mendota Subbasin. We appreciate the reevaluation of the probationary SGMA fees, but additional consideration analysis is needed, as well as more detail on how these collections are proposed to be spent. The Delta Mendota Subbasin, for example, pumps roughly 1 million acre-feet per year, so the subject fee would produce about $20 million annually in a subbasin that is very close to achieving sustainability within the next few years. The Delta Mendota Subbasin, like many of the San Joaquin Valley subbasins, encompass many severely disadvantaged communities which have not been able to afford to participate financially in the SGMA process to date. So appreciate the exemption process, but look forward to seeing that move forward and be approved. From a subbasin perspective, $20 million can go a long way. To desperately continue data collection and the implementation of projects to alleviate localized overdraft. The proposed fee is based on total extractions, which does not appropriately consider lands that have long-standing localized sustainable groundwater conjunctive use programs. Instead, fees should be based on localized overdraft and not total extraction across the board for all pumpers, regardless of localized sustainability. Lastly, managed wetlands that rely on groundwater to exist should not be subject to these proposed fees. California has lost over 95% of its interior wetlands, so protecting these last remaining wetland habitats is of the utmost importance. The vast majority of the managed wetlands in the San Joaquin Valley receive surface water from the Central Valley Project, and despite needing to supplement with groundwater, are sustainable and a critical tool to recharging aquifers and improving water quality. Imposing fees on wetlands will only further expedite the loss of wetlands as we struggle each year to secure adequate funding to provide this habitat, despite a 32-year-old legal mandate of the CVPIA to not only the Department of Interior, but also the state of California. Regulatory fees that are contrary to the state's no net loss of wetlands should be avoided, as was previously considered and memorialized when the Central Valley Regional Board exempted managed wetlands from the Irrigated Land Regulatory Program. Thank you for the consideration of my comments, and great to see you all. Thank you.
Good to see you as well. Appreciate that, Mr. Ortega, and the engagement. I do note, I think as we've indicated, the Delta Mendota Basin is fifth in our line here, and so do know that extrapolating the 20 to then what we would apply to that basin, we'll have discussion before that happens. So appreciate the concerns though, and ultimately the points around wetlands are well taken. So thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Jeff Wyrick, followed by Peter Keel.
Hi, Jeff Wyrick. Can you hear me?
You can, thank you.
Hi, Chairman Esquivel and other board members. Thank you for letting me speak today. Joff Wyrick, president of the El Rico GSA in Tulare Lake and Henry Miller GSA down in Kern. One quick point that I didn't plan to speak on, there are two water banks in the Tulare Lake, so the issue of whether an extraction fee would apply is relevant, with the first one up for probation. That's just a quick aside. The Sigma fees are important in probation, and we completely understand the need for them, and they're in the enabling legislation. The original goal is to cover the actual costs as opposed to a tax. And the proposed fees, based on our annual reports turned in, we pump 500,000 to 600,000 acre feet a year, which would result in $10 to $12 million a year in fees, plus another ballpark million in well fees. And that seems well above what is necessary to be able to finish out the GSPs in a way that gets a sub-basin off of probation. And I'm at a disadvantage. I don't have a budget in front of me, but I ran some quick numbers. And if there was 5 full-time employees dedicated to fixing a certain sub-basin, and just assuming that they had $200,000 a year in cost accounting benefits and another $200,000 for a database to collect data, that comes out to roughly $1.2 million a year, and we'd be collecting 10 to 15 per year. So it seems far in excess of what would be necessary to actually get the GSP in shape, should we fall into probation. The fees then, with doing those multipliers, and it all depends on the budget, of course, but the multipliers would then allow a surplus if the fees were changed to $3 per acre foot and a well fee is $150. That would get it to roughly $2 million, $2.5 million a year. I would just like to request that be considered when the fees are in place, because that would leave an excess $9 to $10 million a year if the proposed fees came into play. And that's the extent of my comments, but thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you for commenting. I appreciate those good comments, Mr. Wyrick, and look forward to what I know is going to be further discussion around all this. So thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Peter Keel, be followed by Morgan Campbell, and then Johnny Galley.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. My name is Peter Keel. I'm speaking on behalf of the Eastern Tule Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and also more broadly on a number of landowners and districts within some of these basins facing potential probationary designations. I did want to express my disappointment we didn't have more time to engage in a stakeholder process on these fees. The description of the normal process that Mr. Russell described is something that I think would have made this fee just more comprehensive and also more fair. I'd like to offer a couple suggestions. I know you feel pressed to adopt these fees before the April Tulare Lake hearing, but if you would consider, pulling it back to your next meeting or working in some flexibility now, I think it would make this better. Two suggestions are, first, regarding the $20 per acre foot fee, set that as a not to exceed amount and give the board the authority on an administrative basis at each probationary hearing to adjust that basin's per acre foot extraction cost. Because the statute directs the board to recover costs incurred, I think it provides some more refinement in real time to collect fees based on that basin's estimated production and therefore estimated revenue to match cost incurred. I think this is important because the first two basins coming up for hearing this year are at a greater risk of going under probation just due to timing. They have less time to submit GSP revisions before hearing. I think it's just a practical reality that there's going to be more stress, more difficulty for them to make the needed changes. Second, I also suggest that you revisit the well reporting fee. Many GSAs already have a well recreation program, in some cases with fees. So many GSAs already collect well information, have a database. Imposing an additional $300 fee is essentially a double tax for them. So building in an exception for wells within GSAs that already have that information, and that information is shared with the board, I think is both efficient and fair. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Keel. I appreciate those comments and the engagement around this, and look forward to, I know, what will be an opportunity for further discussion and adjustment as we move forward around all this. Next, I'd like to call up Morgan Campbell, be followed by Johnny Galley, and I believe our last commenter will be Natalie Escobedo Garcia. Good day.
Morning, Chair Escobar and members of the board. My name is Morgan Campbell, and I'm the Regulatory Manager for Westside Water Authority. Westside Water Authority is a joint powers authority comprised of Bell Ridge Water Storage District, Brenda Mesa Water District, Lost Hills Water District, and Dudley Ridge Water District, and we span both the Kern County and Tulare Lake subbasins. Before I begin, it's important to note that the Kern County subbasin GSAs are diligently working to address DWR's deficiencies and preclude the subbasin from any probationary status. My comments today should not be construed as a lack of faith in that effort. Instead, it reflects Westside's perspective on a nuanced issue regarding how surface water banking projects are regulated under SGMA. Westside Water Authority supports State Board staff's proposal to reduce the volumetric component of the SGMA probationary fee from $40 per acre foot to $20 per acre foot. And we continue to advocate that the State Board ensure the probationary fees align with the actual costs of implementing the SGMA program. But specifically, I'm here today to affirm that Westside Water Authority supports the written comment letter submitted by Brenda Mesa Spreading Grounds, Kern Water Bank, Pioneer Project, and West Kern Water District, known collectively as the Kern Fan Banking Projects. This letter was submitted on March 14th, and it requested that surface water banking recovery wells be exempted from any potential volumetric probationary fees. With a collective maximum storage capacity of approximately 2.4 million acre feet, the Kern Fan Banking Projects intentionally store surface water in the underground aquifer for later recovery during dry years on behalf of specific project participants. The four following key characteristics distinguish these banking projects from other groundwater pumping activities managed under SGMA. Number one, banking participants may only withdraw a portion of the total volume of surface water recharged, resulting in no extraction of native groundwater. Number two, detailed, publicly available accounting records of each participant's recharge and recovery volumes are maintained and verified with multiple public agencies. Number 3, extensive CEQA permitting and mitigation measures are already in place to protect the environment and other local groundwater users, including domestic wells, during recovery operations. And finally, no third-party groundwater beneficial users overlie the property that the banking projects cover. Within Westside Water Authority's boundary, we have naturally occurring high salinity levels in our groundwater that limits both agricultural and municipal beneficial uses of groundwater. As a result, on average, 98% of our irrigation demand is met via surface water supplies from the State Water Project, supplemental purchases, and most relevant to today's agenda item, banked surface water assets. In dry years, previously banked surface water assets comprise up to 50% of our in-district deliveries, and in 2022, even with recovered surface water supplies, instead of pumping groundwater that could permanently damage crops, our landowners were forced to fallow approximately 13,000 acres, the equivalent of over $400 million in market value. Almost 20 years prior to the passage of SGMA, the current fan banking participants reduced their reliance on native groundwater by investing in these projects' infrastructure, environmental planning, regulatory, and mitigation costs. Collecting a SGMA probationary fee on banked surface water extractions disproportionately burdens landowners who proactively invested in groundwater sustainability and regional water supply resilience prior to the passage of SGMA. To put the magnitude of these proposed costs into perspective, in 2022, a SGMA probationary fee of $20 per acre foot would have resulted in a $5.2 million increase in banked surface water costs for Westside Water Authority landowners alone. By exempting the banking project's surface water recovery wells from extraction fees, the state board can foster a regulatory environment that encourages the development and expansion of underground banking projects, which reduces the reliance on native groundwater supplies. It supports the governor's California Water Resilience Portfolio Goal 3.4 to streamline and facilitate underground storage, and reduces reliance on water exports from the Delta by allowing us to continue to capture local surface water supplies in wet years. Westside Water Authority staff look forward to continuing to engage with the board, and thank you for recognizing our written comment letter. And thank you for your consideration. Happy to answer questions now, but we'll plan to continue to engage with staff.
Thank you. Really appreciate your time and consideration and work here, and do look forward to what I know what is going to be further discussion here, but just thank you. Really appreciate
Excellent.
the participation in all of this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Next, I'd like to call up Johnny Galley and then Natalie Escobar Garcia.
Good morning, Chair Escobar and the board. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here. In regards to the Tulare Lake subbasin, we represent many growers in the area, and we appreciate the board's efforts to reduce the fees from the $40 to the $20 level. We've discussed this at your in-person Tulare Lake hearing last year, and there was a lot of concern over those fees. We do still have some concern over the amount of fees to be collected based on the last 4 years of the DWR annual reporting for the agricultural pumping in the Tulare Lake. We will probably be paying fees, extraction fees, from somewhere in the $9 million to $13 million range per year. On average, it's over $10 million a year based on the $20 an acre foot fee, along with the $300 per wellhead. This would basically be able to fund over 50, $200,000 a year positions just for the Tulare Lake subbasin, which seems to be excessive. So, we're just asking that you reconsider the maximum dollar amount of those fees and bring them to be more in line with what the actual costs for regulating the subbasin will be. And that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Galley. I appreciate those concerns. I think we might have some difference of opinion on how much we would actually then collect, but what we will have are actual numbers as we move into this, and know that we're not looking to over collect, and the opportunity to make sure we adjust is there. This is, again, our first best take as we're moving into what is a lot of unknown, but I appreciate your concern, and do know that as we move into, and again, this isn't at the actual probationary hearing, there's a determination there, but as we move into just the years ahead here, we will be keeping an eye on what's actually coming in, what's being collected, and ensure that it is not an over collection, and hear the concern truly from folks here. And just thanks for the engagement on this. Next, I'd like to call up Natalie Escobedo Garcia. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you too. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Escobedo Garcia, providing comments on behalf of Leadership Council. We support the exemption of domestic users utilizing 2 acre-feet or less per year from both reporting and fees, since their impact on basin-wide water demand is by definition de minimis. Additionally, we support the exemption of fees for all small water systems and small community water systems in potential probationary basins. For all other systems that provide domestic water to disadvantaged communities, we ask that there is also a fee waiver process for them in place. We'd also like to encourage the state to explore a different fee structure for small disadvantaged farmers specifically. The state should do this in collaboration with the organizations who work directly with small disadvantaged farmers. Similarly, we support an exemption for managed wetlands from these fees as raised by organizations like Clean Water Action and Audubon. And last, we'd like to continue to express support for the board establishing extraction fees and basins deemed probationary. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate those good comments and continued engagement around all this. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Looking, and I believe that brings us to the end of our commenters. Looking to our fellow board colleagues here, if there's further discussion, question from what we've heard. I appreciate the discussion I know we've had already here at the dais, and I know the considerations that we're all taking in here when we're figuring out how best to balance this fee request. Mr. Ceccarelli, please.
And I'd just like to add one clarifying point. There was a typo in the resolution under the acronym SIGMA. The acronym was spelled typed SMGA, and we have corrected it to SGMA. And that's in the final version that's under consideration by the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that adjustment. Almost perfect, Mr. Rose, almost perfect. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if there's any further desire, discussion, questions, or I think we may be ready for a motion. If not,
I'm prepared to make a motion. All right. Move adoption of item 4 with the change read into the record by Mr. Ceccarelli. And with that, just also want to thank everyone again, and also to encourage some follow-up. I suspect the Sigma team will be doing this anyway, but Mr. Wyrick's point about the couple of areas where they have groundwater banking in the Tulare Lake Basin, it'd be great to get those conversations going so that it's well understood as to what information they might need to provide to clarify that they're pumping surface water and not groundwater. So with that, I make the motion.
sure.
Second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Vice Chair Diadamo. Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Board Member Morgan.
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The vote is unanimous, and the adjustment to fees is adopted. Appreciate everyone's good work and look forward to, I know, always what is going to be more discussion here soon on all of this. So thank you. All right, that concludes item number 4. It brings us to our last item for today's part of this 2-day meeting and brings us to board member reports. Anyone would like to jump in? I can start here soon as well. If not,
Don't have anything to report.
thank you, board member.
I also don't have anything to report.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll go.
Thank you, board member.
I haven't had a report the last few, so I'm very pleased to have one today. So I had the honor of speaking last week, I believe, at the recently at the NACWA annual meeting up in Chico. And just with so much going on right now, I thought it was a really good opportunity to share with a number of the folks up there in the Sacramento Valley about some of the priorities that I think we as a board share and that I certainly have. So I really just focused on 3 topics. safe and affordable drinking water, and the fact that we're essentially at the midpoint right now of SB 200 funding and have made a lot of progress, still have a long way to go, and just emphasize ongoing collaboration there. The Bay Delta planning process and the update that's going on, and encouragement to continue participating with all the opportunities that are coming up here. And then, of course, very appropriate that we just finished the Sigma fees discussion, because I mentioned to folks even in the Sacramento Valley, who I don't believe any of those basins are currently inadequate in terms of being sent over to the State Water Board for probationary consideration, but I did encourage them to be paying close attention to the activities that are going on with the basins that are currently in the process. So, and I also discussed briefly groundwater recharge and some of the challenges and opportunities that I see there. So it was just, a snapshot of so many different issues that we could have discussed, but I think hopefully it was a good opportunity to share a little bit about what we have going on this year. Quite a lot.
Definitely a lot, and thank you for doing that. That connecting is just so critical for everything that we do here. Vice Chair.
Okay, so I traveled to Kern County right after our last board meeting, and was the keynote for the Kern County Water Association's annual event that they have. And it was a full day of panels of all things water, and I was able to stay for the whole thing, but snuck out every time Conveyance or Sites Reservoir came up. So I was kind of hovering around the back for most of it. But yeah, I too provided just an overview of all the things that are going on, all the different moving parts, and was able to stay there, for lunch to have sidebar communications. That evening, I attended a reception for past presidents of the Kern County Farm Bureau. So it was good to kind of have one-on-one opportunities to talk with folks, to really encourage them in Kern County to submit a plan and to continue the good discussions they've been having with our staff. And then the next day, I went a little further north and had a tour of the Tule subbasin.
Fantastic. Quickly here, after the last board meeting on the 6th, I was at the Assembly budget hearing, here advocating for our SACIT budget change proposal, some of the adjustments that we have going, Scott and Shasta positions as well. So it was good to be before the Assembly and making the case for our resources and updating folks on work that we're doing. In that same vein of updating, then on the 13th, I was before the Assembly subcommittee on water, and was doing a hearing on the Safe and Affordable Fund and the SAFER program and our drinking waters work generally. And the work that we all know we still have to go, as Board Member McGuire said, and the fact that we're halfway through this program. So it was a really good opportunity to talk about all of the success and be honest about, and the humility that comes with all that we still have to do, and the fact that there are still many communities that still don't have access to clean water. But it was a good opportunity. There's new members, a lot of new members in the legislature. I think many of them weren't around for certainly the passage of the Human Right to Water, let alone the transfer of the Division of Drinking Water or the Safe and Affordable Fund passage, and the creator of the SAFER program and the telescoping of all the work. So it was good to connect with folks. That next day, I was back now on the Senate side for a budget hearing, doing much of the same that I did for the Assembly. A lot of interest on SACIT, BCP, the water rights update, Upward and Cal Waters came up as well. A lot of folks very interested in knowing where we are in the project, where the digitization is going, how it's going, and importantly, how the database itself is being developed. So it was a good opportunity. Eric Ekdahl was there to be able to fill in a bit. So that was a good opportunity. And then the last thing I just want to mention is I know a few board members were able to attend Christopher Stevens' retirement celebration. I just want to throw a shout out to Christopher. He's been an incredible part of the Division of Financial Assistance and good stewardship over the state revolving funds, and just really appreciate the leadership that he's also created within the institution. And although we're certainly sad to see him retiring. He leaves an incredible legacy behind. So it was great to be able to celebrate that. And oh, last thing is just yesterday I was at the Orange County Business Council, I believe it is, their yearly fly-in, and was there talking. Christine Compton interviewed me on a kind of a fireside chat around just water policy, and was glad to be able to connect with folks there. Talked about conservation, the water supply strategy, the Sackett decision, try to touch as much as I could. So it was a good opportunity. All right, that wraps up board member reports. We don't have an executive director's report, so that wraps up our items for today. We will be in recess until tomorrow morning, where we'll continue on and have our workshop on making conservation as a way of life regulation. Look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow morning at that. Until then, have a good rest of your day, and we are in recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thanks all.